Okay, I think we'll get started now. As people cover the introductions here, as people start joining. But thank you again, everyone, for taking the time and joining us today. Good morning, good afternoon. Um, Obviously, we're going to cover the topic today: AI for inventory optimization. We are uh, fortunate to cover a nice use case with Georgia Pacific. My name is Jeff Wilson. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer here at Verusen, and I'll be your host for the next 45 minutes. Joining me are Paul Noble, as co-founder, CEO of Verusen, and we're honored and really great to have a gentleman by the name of Aaron Meredith, who's the Director of Manufacturing Innovation at Georgia Pacific, join us today to share his thoughts and experience in the use case with us. But first, I'd like to just cover kind of what we're going to do over the next 45 minutes or so, and I'll let both Paul and Aaron introduce themselves. We're going to have a little bit of everything. We're going to have a few slides to kick this off. Aaron will cover a bit of the use case summary for us, and then we're going to have both Aaron and Paul comment on the project itself with some Q&A. And at the end, we will look at the actual platform that's helping Georgia Pacific with their inventory. And then at the end, we'll have a bit of time for some question and answer if we've got some of those. So with that, I'll let Aaron introduce himself there.
Hey, everyone, and thanks, Jeff and Paul and Verusen team for having me. My name's Aaron Meredith. I've been with Georgia Pacific, joined them over 20 years ago. I was just looking recently, I've probably had 14 different roles with GP in that time. So I've been in manufacturing, engineering, business development, innovation, a bit in the IT world. And now I am an innovation director at Point A, which is a supply chain innovation center that GP founded. And it's a member organization with over 40 members, ranging from name brand companies to startups like Verusen. So thanks for having me today, Jeff.
Thanks for joining us, Aaron. Paul?
Yeah, so Paul Noble, founder and CEO of Verusen. Thanks everyone for joining us today, and thank you, Aaron, for taking the time to take a deeper dive into the work we've been doing with Georgia Pacific. So as you all may know, we are a supply chain intelligence company focused on materials management. We're based here in Atlanta, Georgia, hashtag supply chain city. And, prior to founding the company, I spent a little over a decade working in various roles, spent a lot of time in industrial distribution for the Sherwin-Williams Company and some various elements of our internal supply chain, and really saw some key problems that inspired me to found the company, and have worked through and developed what we have here today: systems, processes, and data-related issues across the entire indirect MRO supply chain and materials management supply chain. So we're excited to take a little bit of a deeper dive, introduce those that aren't as familiar with us, a little bit of those key foundational elements that we help solve for in a little bit of quite a bit of a different way than traditional methods, and look forward to presenting that, conversing with Aaron and Jeff, and answering any of the questions that you all have today. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Aaron. And like Paul said, there's there are a lot of solutions out there, a lot of inventory optimization solutions, and we at Verusen believe there's a lot of opportunity to bring a different approach to it. I think you'll hear a little bit of that today. Certainly, the AI component helps with that. But we thought we would get started with having Aaron very briefly just walk us through kind of how it started. Aaron, kind of how you got the project off the ground. What was the current state, the current problem there at GP as you met Paul and kicked off this project?
Yeah. And, so this came forward through Point A, and we connected with Paul and the Verusen team then. and had done some discovery work with GP back last fall. And we'll kind of cover that use case here, and then maybe we can get to some of the background in the Q&A. But GP is a very large organization, over 120 plants across North America, and a large manufacturing base, and many different systems among those because of different divisions within GP, so different ERP systems, so on and so forth. So, but if you look at a company like GP and their manufacturing base, an MRO inventory equates to hundreds of millions of dollars that they're carrying, and which is basically insurance to keep their assets running, as everybody does. And the problem, maybe if we skip to the next slide, they had a couple of problems. One was just purely the magnitude of the dollars involved, right? When you're carrying hundreds of millions of dollars of inventory, they were experiencing some pain, and that pain manifested itself in a lot of working capital tied up in MRO. And additionally, they're adding new items every year to the tune of tens of millions of dollars. And they're not always the right items, and they find they're not carrying the right stuff, and things are aging out, which was resulting over time, in tens of millions of dollars of write-offs on an annual basis when you average it out, which is a very painful problem. And this has been going on for people's entire careers, right? And the roots of the problem were around data. They're around the various systems out there. And when we did a deep dive into this problem and connected Verusen to it, we said, hey, here's a pretty unique approach we could take to tackling this that we've not done for our 20-year careers and tackling that problem. Around how do we optimize the inventory carrying cost, identify, get rid of duplicates, provide better visibility and search across this large manufacturing base. And at point A, we're really geared toward, this proof of concept or MVP approach, which says when there's a problem to be solved and a new novel technology out there that can address it, how can we go out there and demonstrate something in 12 weeks or less? And this is exactly the path we went down with Verusen at GP. It said, okay, let's frame up a 90-day project and see what happens. It's a low cost to entry. And let's see what the value is that we can unlock with this approach versus what some very experienced inventory managers have been doing, their entire career. And if you look at, and that approach yielded great results. And, in 3 months, they were able to identify, tens of millions of dollars of inventory reductions. And it surprised a lot of people because it was relatively easy compared to the work that people were having to put into doing that before. And when you look at what does that mean in terms of how does that reframe your vision or your future state of what could be? And, as you see on the slide here, step one is, okay, just simply optimizing with the data you have, but that's now led to other projects that we're doing with GP through point A that says, okay, if that's true, then can we think about different ways to service all these assets instead of just thinking every facility needs to have their own storeroom? I mean, we've got a big supplier base. Could we have central replenishment models or virtual replenishment models that basically connect all this data and help inform how we can make smarter decisions about servicing our assets without reducing the risk while pulling inventory down dramatically by expanding that capability across Georgia Pacific? Maybe you expand it with other companies that might have geographic proximity. Maybe you expand that to your suppliers that are on your network and use that data to your advantage to really make great decisions that unlock working capital, unlock your annual spend on replenishing it while not increasing risk to your assets. So that's really the journey that we're on here, that Verusen's played a key role in unlocking this journey that we're on and showing that there's really a new business model, a new way to approach managing inventory than most people who are doing this have done it their entire career.
No, thank you, Aaron. And I think that's a good, quick overview of what we'll spend some time now talking about is really the approach and the uniqueness of what you found in the project working with Verusen. And maybe you could just start out with sharing some of your team's initial thinking and that approach in that evaluation of what was it that kind of was different about Verusen's ability to do this in 90 days. I know you guys will probably get into this a little bit, but the scale of what you spoke about in terms of identified savings, you had not just a couple of plants involved in that proof of concept. It was pretty holistic view. Maybe you can just start with your approach in that.
Sure. So, really over a year ago, we spent some time, this is where I first met Paul, in a workshop that Point A hosted in New York City, where we had maybe 30 something different companies there. And we really painted this picture or a vision, if you will, of a future state of these multi-enterprise business networks where multiple companies on a supply chain could share the right data on the right types of platform to create value, mutual value for all the parties involved. And so we kind of started with that vision, and then we said, well, how do we actually do that? I mean, that's a huge elephant. It's a very aspirational vision. So we did some very specific deep dive discovery work with Georgia Pacific that involved one-on-one conversations with many of our member companies. And one of those was Verusen. And it was really coming out of that it was recognized that this approach to just using data to make better decisions without having to go clean it up first and do it quickly with a low cost of entry was a very novel approach. It was low risk to engage in, and we pretty quickly got that across the line as an experiment that we should do at GP and see what that experiment tells us.
So yeah, maybe you can just elaborate there on the experimentation mindset of what does that mean to Point A and GP?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, experimentation is really critical for what we would call profitable learning. I mean, anybody can share knowledge and learn things. People can develop points of view. People can benchmark how they're performing against others in industry. But especially when you have something new and novel, like you have in the emerging tech space today, it's hard to really put a good solid point of view together of what that could be or what that's going to look like until you actually do it. And how do you do it quickly? You're not chasing perfection, you're chasing improvement. And so experimentation is really that key to learning and doing it profitably, meaning whether your experiment fails or it's successful, you should learn enough to help inform your point of view how you should be doing that going forward, right? And that's a concept that we embrace at Point A, and we try to be very purpose driven to, hey, it's great that we talk about the problems, that we frame up what could be, but ultimately we measure our success on how many experiments we get across the line, because that's how we believe that we're going to fundamentally learn faster and improve faster.
No, thank you. So Paul, as you started to meet the Point A folks and get to know Aaron and started to understand what they were looking for, how did the conversation come about? Well, hey, let's just try this. How do you get going? How do you engage in that thought?
Yeah, it was kind of quick alignment. It was good that there's not a lot of education with GP and Coke on what the problem was, and being able to present a different solution and get key stakeholders from the C-suite on down at the table and aligned on the value that could be created very quickly and through this experimentation process, and how that really laid a foundation for long-term success and innovative approach throughout this part of the supply chain and in the future, among others, was a great start. So a very important piece there. And then the opportunity really was understanding a different approach, and the approach had always been I can't really optimize inventory or procure more effectively until I clean my data. And so it always, no pun intended, maintenance around maintenance parts, right? So it's always this big maintenance cycle where by the time you're solving one problem, it's already starting again. And so there's a lot of decisions and data that needs to be managed outside of the system, and a lot of analysis that needs to be done across either, for GP, a more centralized team, but any organization that could be more decentralized. Lots of things happening outside of the system that really make things difficult to wrap your arms around and have an actionable and sustainable and attainable plan. So starting there, getting on the same page and knowing what we could do quickly together really drove the success of this partnership, and is obviously continuing to grow significantly outside of that first initial experimentation period.
Yeah, we'll get to that too as well. So Aaron, your role is specifically manufacturing innovation. You've talked a little bit about experimenting. Maybe just elaborate a little bit more on how large organizations go about getting their teams rallied around, specifically that experimenting and ultimately proven value of how to pilot and test, and what's the approach there? How do you really do that well?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and it's something that large enterprises have traditionally struggled with. And because, most large enterprises are incented to eliminate waste, drive efficiency, and generate cash. And inherently, experimentation carries more risk. It's not always efficient. And so it's been a sticking point. And I think, especially in the emerging tech space, and I've experienced this being in large companies most of my career, is, somebody says, I've got a problem. This emerging tech says, I got a solution. It looks great until they start talking about the scale of it around it. And, they start poking holes in it. And large companies often then just disengage because they don't know what to do with that. And I would say the better path forward is, well, what can you do and what can you learn from it? And this is the value of that experimentation, because the ones that do that are going to form a much better point of view how to get that long-term value than the ones that don't. And it's easy to do today. I mean, companies like Verusen, it's a low cost of entry, software as a service. You don't have to stand up an IT department to do it. You can activate on it very quickly. If you don't like it, you can get out. It's a service that you pay for, and so the risk isn't very high. And those things weren't necessarily true a few years ago, but they're true today. And so I think it all starts with experimentation, taking that learning, enhancing your point of view, deciding what that next step on your journey is going to be to do transformation, and ultimately that leading to either new business models, new operating models, but ultimately leading to new ways of doing things that are different than how you've been doing before. Because if you're just looking for software to help you do what you're doing today better, that's great. But the bigger opportunity is, well, how could we do whatever we do today much differently given all the technology that's out there today? So I think that's the mindset that large enterprises like GP are starting to embrace and move forward with, that's driving experimentation and the value of doing that kind of experimentation.
No, agree. So Paul, what's given the, certainly given the environment, the business environment today, with obviously the workforce is working remote, sometimes a little bit more difficult to do this experimentation, but companies still have to innovate. How has Verusen helped companies really take that first step into piloting, testing, to make it easier for the company to do this? What are some of the things that Verusen's done to do just that?
Yeah, well, we were built for it prior to the pandemic, but have really optimized how we can support organizations remotely. You know, during this time, certainly capital and improving processes is important, but how many resources amongst all the many things that an organization like GP or many of you on the call here today are experiencing, how many resources does it take? So as we've built this technology, our process from sales to onboard or to implementation to success, you know, resources are certainly low effort portion of that is certainly very important. So more than dollars, although those are very prevalent as well, people resources, what does it take to stand up or run one of these experiments, and removing a lot of the traditional barriers of integration and IT involvement. So very, very low touch there, and reduce, now that we can't do it at all, virtually any on-premise engagement. So to look at one of these projects and attack an entire network of data, 120 plus facilities, and and on a global supply chain this quickly with no cleansing and not going plant by plant, I think is an important part of how we've optimized our processes, and can give a very holistic, actionable view, enterprise view, without it taking years. So even as we stand today and we're talking to customers, it's what can you get done? Speed to value is more important than ever, especially as anything looking historically has changed, right? You got to be quick and nimble, and it's often difficult to do that. So that's something obviously that we took into account here with GP and have laid the groundwork and the foundation for, but something that we're continuing to optimize as an organization, because that's really one of the more important parts that we've seen for success.
No, well said, both of you. So I think I'd like to kind of shift to even a little bit deeper beyond the experimentation into kind of Aaron, Paul, both of you. How did you start to define what that scope was? If you're going to experiment on a technology or pilot it, proof of concept, and building a case for it, some of the challenges that you have internally, obviously aligning stakeholders along what your outcomes are, what's the scope of the project? We alluded a bit earlier to, was it all 120 plants? In this case, it was. The scope of data involved. It's kind of the benefits of what we're able to do in a project like this. How quickly, as Aaron, you pointed out, that you can get to an outcome by trying something. So maybe, Aaron, I'll start with you just to kind of spend a little bit of time on how you scoped it, what your outcomes were, a little bit further.
Yeah, absolutely. When we did this discovery work with GP, clearly when you got a problem that people have been working on their entire careers, it's not a small problem. And there are a lot of facets to it. You can get into things like, do we have people's incentives aligned in the organization? So, people in operations are just ordering parts and throwing them in the storeroom without accountability, versus somebody in the storeroom's like, my storeroom's inflating and I have no control over it. Or just access to data for reporting, for example, could be a facet of it. Or how do you actually interact with your suppliers and use data to your advantage? So the scope can get really big really quick, right? And the approach that we took in this case was to say, yes, that's true. And because there's very different facets here, we could do very different experiments. We don't have to do it all in one go, right? What can we do to advance our learning and do it quickly, affordably, no risk bet kind of thing, right? And that's where the Verusen project scope felt very right. It just, okay, we know how we think about data today in GP and how we think about min-max levels and managing that risk against our assets. Let's just do a test and let's test out this Verusen tool and see what it tells us that might be different than that, or give us insights that we didn't think of before. And without actually knowing what the value was going to be at the end of the day, quite honestly. There were some data points from some benchmark, work that Verusen had done with other customers and things like that. But for GP, the bet was honestly, we're going to learn something from this, and it might create a lot of value for us. It might not, but let's do the test and find out. Fortunately for GP, it did create a lot of value and helped inform how to move forward. So I think when you're talking about experimenting with emerging technologies, especially, I believe companies are going to have to take on some risk. You can't know all the answers before you go into it. If you try to figure out all the answers, one, you're going to be wrong, and two, you're not going to do anything. So I think that's a level of risk you have to take on to even be willing to experiment sometimes with new technologies you're not familiar with.
Absolutely. So on that point, I think the last question I'd like to kind of summarize this with is having both of you get real specific on what happened during those 90 days. And I'll start with Paul. Just what were the things that Verusen brought to the table of how you kind of scoped that 90 days and how you, again, made it simple, but literally, what were some of the actual details of the project? And then Aaron, you alluded to kind of a big outcome in savings and double-digit millions. And so just some specifics on the 90-day project itself.
Yeah, so clearly, Aaron scoped out a bit of the problem that every corporate that we work with and every enterprise deals with based on the systems that they run. It's not a lack of desire to want to fix these things. Systems, processes, and shadow accounting to hide some of the issues, and untrustworthy data really being a part of it. So understanding that we were on the same page there. We were able to again look at 120 facilities, 7 different business units sitting on SAP in 2 different EAM systems, and take that data and then within a 30-day process, take all of that material master data and the movements associated with them, historically get them into our system and have the experts at GP remove what 40-50% of their time was being spent on analyzing in isolation, give them a prioritized view to take action on what the system was telling them. So begin ranking by plant, look at all the data, and begin verifying plant needs material by material in a one-click fashion. And we'll show you here a little bit in the demo an example of that, not GP specific example, but the process. So that was quickly realized and obviously able to move through what would have taken months and years as a total to achieve that within a 45-day period. Was really great based on the urgency and attention on both sides. So I think that's something we always kind of harp on, and Aaron and his team can attest to is this isn't your traditional Verusen comes and camps out at GP Tower on a floor for a few months, right? It's something that the heavy lifting is done, and this turns into a process that's as optimally as simple as checking your email daily.
No, and Aaron, just to finalize, any surprises by the GP team on the 90-day project that you didn't expect, that kind of the outcome that you spoke about. Maybe just kind of summarize for us all here.
Yeah, so there were a couple of schools of thought that were very interesting. One would be the people that were doing battle every day, right? That were trying to manage this every day and struggling with it. And just seeing the level of hope when they were engaging in the project, and then the level of excitement when the results started pouring in was really special to see, and they continue to be very excited. And the other aspect is really more from a senior leadership level. Maybe a bit of skepticism, right? It's like, okay, we've been doing this a long time. We kind of know what we're doing. We'll see what we get here. And then seeing the results and that then catalyzing the thoughts of, okay, maybe there is a different way we can do this now, right? And now how do we think about changing the way we manage this whole system based on what we've learned here? And that shift in thinking that is leading us down that journey that we showed in the slides earlier and saying, okay, what's the next step? What else can we try to do here that's different than what we've done today? So, I've observed both those schools of thought, and it's very exciting. And, I think that we're only limited by how hard and fast we want to lean into it. And we can predict, where that's going to lead us down the road. And we might be right, we're probably wrong, because we'll learn stuff along the way that might tell us, something we didn't think about before in terms of how we can leverage these kinds of capabilities as we go, but we're going to learn that by keep doing it. So very excited to see the results at GP, very excited to see them continuing to use the tool today, and sustain those results and go after more and find new ways to leverage this kind of capability to create new value.
That's great. Thank you, Aaron. It's a lot of good things have happened, obviously, over the last 4 or 5 months with GP. So I know there's been a couple of questions that have come our way through while we've been speaking. We are going to answer those. We thought we would first very quickly in the next 10 minutes show a little bit of the platform as promised. And we will get here. And again, today is just a quick high-level overview of what it might look like for a user at a plant level, procurement level, to go in and begin looking at how they can not just optimize, but better source, better procure, and better decision-making at the plant level. So with that, I'm going to have Paul Noble narrate a bit of what you'll see on the screen here as we go through here over the next 10 minutes.
Yeah, and we'll keep it high level, and obviously can schedule any follow-up to go more detailed on your situation or take a deeper dive into a demo. But as we stated, taking complex Frankenstein of systems, many systems, and aggregating the key elements and tables around materials into an easy to consume and take action on platform. So what you're seeing here is a representation of an organization that had 2 different SAP systems, a legacy SAP system and an acquired SAP system, demonstrably different data sets that we ingested as is, as well as 2 different systems that planned for inventory differently, reorder points versus safety stock and things of that nature. So we combine those and give a plant by plant level. So what you're seeing here is the output is what we like to call a byproduct, is inventory optimization. Where can we go get all of the low-hanging fruit and make some verifications to create a baseline for further recommendations. So an important element here is what we call a recommendation card that takes everything in the system associated with that material. So this is movement, purchase orders, bill of materials, so on and so forth. And we create a recommendation off of that based on what we think, what Verusen's recommendation should be, and you can simply agree or disagree with that. You have all the information, again, that's in the system. A key point to this is that most of the knowledge lives outside of the system. So what this is a mechanism to transfer that knowledge to a neural net, and that's why we utilize AI as a mechanism for speed, scale, and accuracy, while giving a simple way to move through and learn from every decision across the enterprise. And so I can simply here agree with the recommendation, and that kind of creates an audit trail of and works towards, you know, a feedback loop of, you know, what's the next recommendation, what's the outcome of that. Or is equally as important is this knowledge transfer aspect where I can disagree. I can say, well, I don't quite agree with, I know something else that wasn't in the system. So let me give you my opinion. So this is a big human element that is often or never taken into account and really sinks a lot of the scalability of these types of projects. And we've been studying and making this very, you know, our goal is to continue to keep it as simple as you're seeing it as we grow. So I, as a user and an expert, can now tell you why I disagree and give you some additional information that can be applied to that material. I know dollar value, and this begins registering and giving each individual plant, division, leadership, a full view of what's available and ready to take action, and that's where that speed to value comes in. So what we're also doing at the same time, and the reason we have such high confidence, and one other point in the inventory optimization side of things is we see that as the most relevant place to start, and I'll explain that here quickly. So with the typical process, cleanse data, categorize procurement information, and how will I buy things, and then often there's a disconnect in how that's then inventoried across the enterprise. What we like to do is take existing data, let's understand it enough that we can make recommendations to a service level at 6 Sigma, 95% and above. You know, you have voice in what those service levels are, and let's go after inventory first and say, here's areas where you can tighten up. This is this is what we call wave one, cost reduction and cost avoidance. This sets new levels so you don't over procure and overspend, and begins verifying things that we can then obviously turn on the virtual network in wave two, a period of time after these verifications are made. But the understanding of the data is what you see here. So at the same time, across systems and within the same system, we are utilizing our technology that can find duplicates that would be very difficult or impossible to find in traditional methods. And we're saying, you know, we have a high confidence that here's the description, here's where it's at, here's what you're paying for it, and here's where you're getting it. Can you agree with the check mark, disagree with the X, or am I unsure? And you begin verifying these pairs. So once you're verifying these duplicate pairs, it's grouping them behind the scenes and working towards this process that'll get you to verifications in groups, and ultimately a true golden record that gets augmented and improved. That's really, you know, much of that goal. So each of these decisions are accounted for, and making it very simple. Additionally, what we're showing here is part of what, you know, when we're attacking these problems, we're really looking for true solutions and not just more workflows. So in developing this, change management was a big thing, right? So how can we achieve these things with as little friction as possible operationally? So this search is a huge component. It allows anyone across the organization, as duplicates are confirmed, to find, search for things by material ID or fuzzy Google type search for items, and also we'll tell you where it's at and where there are possible or verified duplicates within the system. All of these things help new materials being or limit new materials being added if I can buy from myself first. So there's all these different elements and all this complexity on the back end being made very simple. And that's why we see the results we do with companies like Georgia Pacific. and Koch Industries. So that, as we look at where this goes, these verifications, again, are a brick by brick foundation around data that helps continue to deliver byproduct output in inventory optimization, as well as procurement intelligence. So there are things that we have in development and are releasing on a bi-weekly basis that help deepen this for your specific organization, where you learn, and then also macro elements that we apply across our network that help, again, remove this from the untrustworthy part of your supply chain.
Yeah. No, thanks, Paul. I think today, obviously, with the time, we just had time enough to give you a high level of what a user would begin looking at. We certainly would appreciate any further interest to there's a lot more behind the scenes here relative to how the technology is bringing structure to the data and doing this so quickly in terms of scale. You heard Aaron talk about 120 plants worth of data, and within 30 days they were able to start verifying savings on that project. I think we'll transition now real quickly with a couple minutes left to some of the questions that were asked. And I'll throw this one to Paul. It talks about how does the solution manage or consolidate the item master where there may be duplicates, and how does it identify the unique or official one? How does it maybe complement what MDM does in master data management? What role does this play in that effort?
Yeah. So again, the reason that organizations are so keen on improving data and cleansing data is to drive business results. So we have developed this process to be able to immediately begin driving those results in the form of inventory reduction and optimization, all while creating an audit trail and flagging and creating, like I explained a little bit in the demo, verifying duplicates and then resurfacing potential duplicates and interchangeable parts, all working towards what will be selected as a golden record from a specific supplier or just as a material itself. What we're looking to do first, though, is utilize, can I find that material within my network? If I can't find it from my network, can I get, that information from my supplier? If I can't get it from my supplier, can I get it from the web? And then manual entry is really the last place we look to do this, because it creates another process that will be likely circumvented. So as we continue to release features around material creation, we're going to very much stay true to allowing you to harness the data in your supply chain network and achieve those things with less human entry.
Okay. Couple others. One was just around the price model of how does Verusen charge for its platform?
Yeah, so we combine, as you see, we combine usually 2 to 3 projects over a couple year period of time that we can condense into as many months. So we looked at it, and because of the technology and our approach, we go with the unlimited record, unlimited facilities, unlimited user model that doesn't handcuff you by looking at the enterprise view as you need to, and allows us to look and learn from the data at scale. Really, we start at a very simple price structure, starting at as little as $10,000 a month for an entire organization, and then look at catalog complexity. So how many different data sets are you looking at? Are you a CPG that's grown through M&A over the years and have 25 different instances of SAP or any ERP system? versus, someone that has 3. That's going to determine the cost. But our goal in this initial limited subscription proof of concept phase is that you'll get a 10x return on your investment, and you'll pay for the first year of the subscription through what we find for you. And we are, willing to bet the house on that.
So there's no user record charge?
No. Again, unlimited records. And then we have mechanisms for making that near real time and an automated data exchange experience. All the security measures to make sure that it meets but doesn't get bogged down from IT or by IT. And not to offend any IT callers out there. Execute, make things happen.
Yeah.
So.
I know we're past our 2:45 time. There was a couple more questions. I'll get to them as quickly as possible. Do you use outside sourced data to help identify duplicates?
So we've trained and run millions of parts or materials data through our system. So there is some knowledge that we have gathered from a macro level that helps there. So there's certainly importance there. And then really we're not adding or looking at any external data to start. It's really your existing data that again allows us to drive that speed to value.
Yeah, and a little bit related to that, there was a question about where do our core descriptions come from?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we do not force into any categorization or naming convention out of the gates. What we do is tag information that allows us to look across different data sources, look across different languages, things in that capacity, and can put you, in a better position as you decide to categorize, but it's not necessary out of the gate.
Oh, thank you. The last question that we have time here, there was a question about stakeholders, and I know I think both Paul and Aaron referred to various stakeholders from the ops and procurement sides, even IT. So I think pretty complementary to helping align the incentives, because they can be very different from procurement to ops, certainly. So, but given the nature that Verusen doesn't limit its use by users, it's trying to be very open and transparent about that.
Yeah, each organization's different. So we know that some make plant level decisions, others make centralized decisions, others have MDM teams to support, others need engineers to touch this. So that's one of the reasons we've gone with the unlimited users model. Whoever needs to touch and make a decision on a recommendation or a verification can be set up, and we can bridge those gaps and align those incentives across ops and procurement specifically, but even looking at things around finance and MDM as well.
Well, thank you both. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Aaron, for the time today. And most of all, thanks everyone for hanging on through the time today to the end here for the questions. So we'd love the opportunity to speak with anybody about just a deeper dive. We really kind of hit the high level surface on the use case at GP and Aaron's thoughts. And I'm sure that both Aaron and Paul are happy to talk further if you'd like to. But thank you again for everyone for their time today, and we'll be in touch. And by the way, everybody will get a copy of what we've shared today as joining. So talk to you soon. Thank you.
Thanks. Stay safe.
Thanks, Jeff.